Fuck. This never actually gotten resisted before. It was the first. Force the one group them into the fucking lock. You have to get a big drop like that and lose it to them.
not defile these mysteries. Burn in righteous fire.
Well, we did pretty good. DPS. Overall DPS 95. I don't know how valuable that is to even know the overall DPS. But, yeah, overall damage done. And that druid, he just did. He had a lot of damage. I don't know too much about. I don't know if he was feral. I mean, he was a boomkin, I guess, because he was in the boomkin form. What's happening? The fuck is happening? I'm curious. What spec is this fucking guy? Yeah, he's a boomkin. Okay. Just can't leave the fucking group. Range. What the fuck? Why can't I leave this party? I'm gonna have to fix it once I get to the city, I guess. A troll? Orc mage? What the fuck? That stuff still surprises me. Some of the weird class combinations that they've got on here. Tell you what, I'd really like to go down to Stormrot Ruins and get some of these pieces of the Storm Reaver set. At least 2 pieces. Get that spell hit. See if the logout fixes it. Alright, cool. So, oh, it's pretty good. Okay. I do want to run RFD at some point. Or maybe just farm Plague Maw. If I can find somebody to, a couple people to run with that also wanted either Tutenkosh or Plague Maw. Yeah, I really wish I knew where to get the recipe for this thing.
What is
Ooh, illuminated gemstone. I'm gonna get that. Precision jeweler's kit. Find me one of those. Oh, fuck, I need mage weave cloth for this. Haven't even really started getting into that yet. I guess I gotta get that jeweler's kit then. How expensive that's gonna be. Fuck me, 3 gold. Dude's selling them for 50 silver. It's an 11 damage, 11 spell damage offhand, dude. Why would you sell that for 50 silver? He's literally selling it for the vendor price. You stupid piece of shit. Why do people shoot themselves in the fucking foot like that? They just throw shit away, and then it hurts everyone else that's trying to make money off the profession. I'm not saying charge like a ridiculous fee, but I'm saying, you know, charge 1 gold for something if the vendor cost is gonna be fucking 50 silver.
What do you require? Dark Lady, watch over you.
Me too. Alright. I'm curious, does the precision jeweler's kit overwrite the jeweler's kit? Do I need to have fucking both of them in the inventory?
This is your only warning. Necromancer shall rule supreme, and Hecuba shall be their queen!
Never actually played that game. Always saw it on GOG and stuff. It looked kind of interesting, but never was compelled to buy it. Looks kind of like Ultima. Jesus Christ, like 45 running the library? Dude, those 90s 3D FMV videos.
Nox is an isometric action RPG developed by Westwood Pacific and published by Electronic Arts in February 2000. Players take the role of unassuming auto mechanic Jack, who is inadvertently teleported from his home on Earth to a world of magic and mythology, where cities are ruled
so it
by
is like
sword
Ultima.
and spellcraft,
It's an
and
isekai.
fabulous beasts roam the fields and forests betwixt. Jack soon finds himself caught up in the machinations of the necromancer queen Hecuba, who seeks to raise an army of the dead and conquer the peoples of the south. Our unlikely hero is taken under the wing of a curmudgeonly airship captain, who advises him to learn the arts of either warrior, wizard, or conjurer, thus training with either the Fire Knights of Dunmere, the Ranger Priests of Ix, or the Magi of Castle Gallivre. Jack sets out on a quest to reassemble the fabled Staff of Oblivion and stop Hecuba before her armies grow too powerful to resist. Traversing hostile kingdoms, forests of bandits and bears, fetid swamps, echoing caverns, and the plains of the ogre tribes, Jack's journey will ultimately lead him to the frozen land of the dead, and perhaps even beyond. Although widely considered a Diablo clone by contemporary critics, Nox was developed as a dual single and competitive multiplayer-focused title, and many of the core mechanics were shared between both modes.
I never
On top
thought
of
it
its
was Diablo
online
clone.
deathmatch options and 3 different solo campaigns, Westwood hoped to distinguish Nox from other action RPGs with a number of technological innovations, in particular its true sight vision system, its physics-based dynamic environments, its advanced artificial intelligence, and its trademarked creative combat system, which combined extensive spell combinations with asymmetrical class balance. The game would later be expanded with a free co-op mode, Nox Quest, which scored players on how far they could progress through endless, semi-randomized dungeons before being wiped out by Hecuba and her minions. Nox launched in a crowded market for action RPGs, sandwiched between releases like Delphine's Darkstone, Cinematic's Revenant,
Darkstone,
and the
hell yeah.
booming release of Blizzard North's Diablo 2.
Fucking love
But Westwood
Darkstone.
hoped the game's unique mechanics and fast-paced, tactically layered multiplayer duels would nevertheless ensure its success. Nox released 2 mildly positive reviews from gaming magazines, credited by many for its spell combos,
9 out
control
of 10
scheme,
basically.
quirky humour, and the unusual playstyle of the Conjurer class. But it was also widely criticised for its unoriginal story, repetitive environments, lack of co-op, similarities to rival action RPGs, and alleged use of Australian voice actors. Insight magazine gave Nox 4 stars out of 5, calling it a well-polished...
Why is using did he say alleged use of Australian voice actors? Why is that a...
highly compelling gameplay
I
experience,
don't understand why that's like
albeit
a...
one ripe with Diablo deja vu. Steve
negative.
Kiet felt there was little at all to dislike about the game, saying that the multiplayer was a blast, the interface and controls incredibly slick, and the story meatier than expected, though cautioned that players would love or hate the true sight system, and that the multiplayer could be brutally unforgiving for beginners. Kiet concluded that Nox was the best Diablo clone yet.
Release the hounds!
Why the fuck wouldn't it cast? I could have got a spirit tapestry then. What was? I didn't even see what the error message was.
defile these mysteries. Burn in righteous fire.
God damn it. What the fuck? Is it doing it again? It's so weird. He ain't gonna fucking give it up, dude. He's gonna be like, why should we re-roll? Oh, shit, I won. See, 11 damage. Oh, shit.
scourge!
In the
Well, it's fun runs anyway, I guess. Got some XP. Got a BOE. What is up with leaving instances like it? It's like it. I don't know. It's like it's wanting to fucking crash anytime you're leaving an instance. I don't think where I should go now. Maybe a Rothy? Hmm. Oh, I wonder if they've fixed the map. Let's see. Looks better. I really don't want to fucking go to Desolus. Oh, STV. Why not? Haven't been there in a minute. Man, that is a cool, that would be a cool transmog item. But I can sell it. I wonder if that enchant's worth anything. Definitely gotta buy some water while I'm here. Dude, fucking water's getting expensive. It's crazy. I'm not used to playing a caster where I'm having to fucking drink every single pull. It's like each pull is costing me 2 silver right now. So I'm easily like each run through a dungeon is costing me like at least a gold just in water. I can't wait to be able to make that thing. The Opaline Illuminator. I think the Shadow Priests have been, like, everything I've been reading is saying, like, yeah, don't worry about fucking spell crit. Spell crit sucks. But it's like, with the latest change, kind of makes spell crit, like, important a little bit. Maybe not hugely important. Maybe not, like, you know, the top in the priority, but definitely not shit. Oh, wow. It's disappointing. That's not worth it either. I gotta learn those. Let's see this. Oh, are you joking, dude? Less than a gold for this fucking thing. Whatever. Alright, we could make some of these. I need moonstone. I don't know where to get moonstone. Holy shit. These things are 8 silver a pop. That's nuts. I gotta sell some of this tin, get it out of my bags. That's wild that this, like, well, let me look. Moonstone and Astral Essence. It's just weird they would pick 4 spirit to be that expensive of a recipe when you already have one that's like stamina. Way cheaper. I would imagine the stamina is more in demand. What is it called? Pure Moonstone. Oh, 10 silver. Okay. Yeah, them adding jewel crafting and making it to where jewel crafters can, like, find the gems in their little gemstone clusters and stuff. It's really messed with the price of these gems. So I kind of always assume it's going to be like it used to be, where, you know, a lesser moonstone's like 2 gold on the auction house, but they're like fucking 7 silver. Now this will probably still be expensive. Not really. Okay. Fuck us. I guess I'll just make one right now. And then I need... Whoa, wait, what? Stacks. I was like, why'd the price change so much? But I see now. Then I need to get the recipe. Oh, let's see. Smoldering broke. I think that'll probably sell pretty well. Okay, so all those trinkets are like a gold 25 to a gold 50. I just think that one will actually sell because the spirit ones just really weren't moving. The stamina ones were going fast, but they're like yellow now, I think. No, they're green now, so. So I need heavy gritted paper. I wonder if I can actually get some fucking mage weave pretty cheap. I don't know how expensive it'd be here. $20 for 1 gold. It's like 5 silver a pop. Gets me some skill ups, it's worth it. The sooner I can make my staff, the better. Even though I can't use it for till level 40, but ooh, I gotta find someone to enchant it too, maybe put some spell damage on it. That might be a little out of my price range though. It'd be cool though. Craft it all. Make. Five levels out of it. What the fuck? So that illuminated gemstone went from being orange at skill 200 to being gray at skill 205. What the fuck? I was going to be disappointed if it had yellowed out at that point, dude. 5 skill levels and it's useless to you? What the fuck? I gotta turn the AC on, it's getting hot in here. Watch this thing. Finish watching this thing about Nox. I might buy it. It's one of those ones I just saw it a bunch for years, known about it for years, but I've always kind of
and that with a little more
never got
originality, it
drawn
would have
into it.
earned the magazine's highest score. Australia's PC Power Play were also mostly positive, awarding Nox 83% and calling it a kinetic and frenetic experience, with enough thrills, spills, and light RPG-ness to put it in a class of its own. Timothy Best heaped special praise on the diversity of class options and the low-spec friendly software-rendered visual effects, though argued that the single player was too linear, that the multiplayer necessitated a fast internet connection, that the sound effects were of uneven quality, and finally that some of the NPCs sounded like Americans trying to copy an Oceanian accent. Best likened Nox to a roller coaster, arguing that the game was a great ride, but still very much on rails. Hyper Magazine also lamented that Nox had not done much to further the action RPG genre, giving it 79% and saying it earned few points for originality. Dan Toos praised the gameplay of the Wizard and Conjurer classes, the excellent music, the alternate start positions and companion AI of the single-player campaign, and the ingenious interface. However, Toos was critical of the higher resolution options, which were performance-intensive and zoomed too far out from the action, the multiplayer's focus on competitive play over co-op, and the single-player game's random difficulty spikes, which he felt forced either frantic reloading or a tedious and anal approach to gameplay. Toos also repeated PC Power Play's objection to the use of Australian voice actors, and called Nox a decent but formulaic single-player experience that lacked the lasting appeal of the original Diablo. PC Zone were even less enthusiastic, giving Nox 72% and characterizing it as a makeshift Diablo 2. David Stark applauded the varied playstyles of the three classes, the quantity of spell effects and items available, and the game's replay value, but admitted there were times he had hated Nox's early sections, and on several occasions almost quit out of boredom. Stark felt that players who persevered would enjoy playing around with the higher level skills, but that overall Nox had failed to sufficiently distinguish itself from Diablo, concluding that it was repetitive and derivative, but potentially addictive all the same. Next Generation magazine were of a similar mind, tentatively awarding Nox 3.5 stars. Eric Bratcher framed the game as a humorous and solid spin on the action RPG format that would struggle to avoid being dismissed as a Diablo wannabe. But one of the most critical reviews came from Edge magazine, who gave Nox 6 out of 10, claiming it was a prime example of Westwood Studios' dearth of imagination. Edge called Nox an unusually polished PC title, giving it credit for the alternate playstyles, in particular the Conjurer class, and for its multiplayer potential, but was overall highly negative, saying Nox's Tolkien-esque cultural puritanism, threadbare plot, lack of female character options, dated graphics, lackluster and uninspired gameplay.
I don't understand the lack of female character options critique. Because, I mean, especially when you're working with, like, 2D sprites, like, every frame of every variation of the player character has to be drawn separately. So even, just having, like, clothing options or different, different weapon options and things like that you're basically multiplying the amount of artwork that you need every time that you add something, if you want it to actually appear on the character and stuff. So while, like, it's a shame that they weren't able to do that, it's understandable. Especially if they didn't have, like, a huge budget and a huge art team and all that stuff to work from. I wouldn't really, I don't know. It's one of those things, like, yeah, it would be cool if they could, but I'm not going to knock the game for not being able to do it, for working with what they had. I feel like some reviewers go into things wanting to find a reason to slam it, you know what I mean? Because they're talking about, like, I mean, even like yeah, Diablo 2 has multiple characters, or Diablo had multiple characters, but they only each had, I want to say there was like 3 variations of each character based on the armor you were wearing. They each had like a male, like you had like a one in clothing, one in like a leather type armor, and then you had the one in male. There might have been a plate one, so maybe there was 4. Either way, I understand it's a budget limitation thing usually with that kind of, with art stuff.
And underutilized technological innovations were a depressing sign that the future of video games never seemed so far away. International reviews of Nox were generally positive, with Russia's Stranai Igor awarding it 9 out of 10, and arguing that comparisons to Diablo were doing the game a disservice. Although disappointed by the scanty narrative, simplistic quests, and general lack of RPG elements, GameWorld echoed English publications in their praise of the interface and controls, dynamic environments, and, as the reviewer put it, the 90-60-90 of the game's shapely villainex's fair-formed antagonist, but confessed to feeling slightly let down by the experience as a whole, giving it 88% for being, in their words, a very good game, but not quite a classic. Like Edge magazine, Joystick posited that the lack of female classes, limited character customization, and predictable hack-and-slash gameplay put paid to any pretense of Nox being a role-playing game. Still, the magazine concluded that in narrowing their scope to an action-adventure, Westwood had produced a finely tuned, fast-paced, and fun arcade experience, albeit one lacking in the strategic depth promised by its developers. Germany's PC Player gave Nox a score of 82%, saying it was a humorous, wonderfully scored, and highly detailed action-adventure, but was nevertheless still merely a very competent Diablo clone. The magazine was also one of the few to take issue with Nox's control scheme, saying it was occasionally cumbersome and awkward, and like Hyper Magazine, felt that the 2D sprites were too small to see properly when rendered at higher resolutions. Finally, Argentina's Extreme PC were particularly harsh, giving Nox only 79%. The magazine argued that the innovative TrueSight system and novel multiplayer certainly deserved credit, and hoped that future action RPGs might imitate them, but that they weren't enough to redeem the bland story, shallow single-player experience, and limited role-playing options. In 2011, Nox was made available on goodoldgames.com, and in 2016, Electronic Arts temporarily offered the title as a free download on their Origin digital distribution service. Nox's multiplayer community persisted for many years after the game's original launch, and though Westwood's official servers were eventually shut down, fan-hosted alternatives remain active as of October 2023. Despite Nox being eclipsed by Blizzard's Diablo 2 only a few months after its release, it was a generally well-received title that is remembered fondly by some, and for this reason, as well as its unusual origins and the innovations it was attempting, it deserves its time in the sun. In today's video, we'll take a look at Nox's development from one-man passion project to retail game, then tackle its single-player campaigns, art and sound design, and finally its story and setting. As always, feel free to watch the video in order, or just...
Dude, I did not realize how fucking good that was. That thing is awesome. 13 stam, 4 spirit. 12 spell damage. What is the storm thing? Storm Reaver thing. Storm Reaver Drake. Three int. 12 spell damage immediately. Oh yeah, this is way better than that. Ornate mithril bracelets. See if that's going to be any good. Because that set would be nice to have if it has good stats. Ooh, yeah, no, not worth it. Not for this guy.
Jump around using the timestamps below to get to the part that interests you. With that out of the way, let's head back in time to the early 1990s and find out just how Nox came to be. The stirrings of what would become Nox first coalesced in January 1995, originally as a solo project of University of Iowa graduate Michael Booth. Having recently completed a degree in mechanical engineering, Booth was supposed to be directing his energies towards a master's in computer science. Alas, Booth's real passion lay more in the realm of video games. Although Booth specialized in 3D visualization and artificial intelligence programming, he had been learning to code and play games since the early days of the Apple II, and by the time Booth finished his bachelor's, he already had a vision for his own dream project. What he envisioned was a fast-paced, action-packed wizard dueling game that demanded both quick reflexes and a mind for strategy. According to Booth, there were 3 particular inspirations that fed into the concept for Nox. The earliest was Booth's memories of playing 1985's Gauntlet, the first game he'd ever played that combined hack and slash, multiplayer, and some degree of tactical thinking into a single product. The second and rather unexpected influence on Nox was Midway's Mortal Kombat series. What specifically attracted him to the franchise were the frantic button combinations required to trigger the various combos and finishing moves, inspiring Booth to create a similar system for casting elaborate spell chains. Up, up, down, for example, would generate a fireball, but this could be combined with other spells to create unique magic combos. But the final influence was no computer game at all. Like many vulnerable young men of his day, Booth had fallen victim to the phenomenon that was 1993's collectible card game Magic the Gathering. Magic was superficially a relatively straightforward contest of summoning and spells, yet the interplay between the different card types resulted in matches of surprising depth and complexity that Booth hoped to recapture in his game. Booth thus later described his initial vision for Nox as a spiritual successor to Gauntlet, but built around real-time strategic magic battles. Players would input individual syllables of a spell on their gamepads to generate an almost endless variety of casting combinations, with some spells countering others.
Oh, I see what he's going for. Well, that's quite a bit different, I think, from what they ended up shipping, but let's do one at a time, or should I just throw them both up? Yeah, that's actually a really cool idea, though. So I can see what they're talking about as far as like you're putting spells together like a each spell is like a combo from Mortal Kombat. I don't see the magic influence. I guess they're just talking about as far as like, being able to cancel out effects and do all that stuff, but
a recreation of the epic
would have been a cool
wizard
thing if that's what
Booth
it
had
actually
read in his
was.
favorite fantasy
The real thing was
the
quite a
game's
bit
title
different.
was derived from one of several technological innovations that Booth planned for the game. The Latin word nox, or night, was a reference to a dynamic real-time line-of-sight mechanic that simulated isometric vision cones for the battling wizards, allowing crafty players to set up sniper holes, spring ambushes, and conceal them behind props. According to a later interview, this true sight was partly informed by the tension of being ambushed in first-person shooters, which Booth had become particularly interested in during the mid-90s, and he wanted to translate FPS hide-and-seek tactics to an isometric perspective. Another key feature was to be Nox's dynamic environments, by which every object in the game could be moved around or destroyed, with the combatants able to use props to trigger traps or block corridors, or furniture being tossed about by fireballs and energy bolts. But though Booth's plans for Nox grew more ambitious, they were still focused upon his original outline, a competitive, multiplayer, action-oriented title that was to be played with a gamepad. Though Booth originally began working on the game in a spare bedroom of the family home, he knew he needed a good deal of funding to realize his dream. The solution to this problem came in the form of Hyperion Technologies, co-founded by Booth in 1995 as an odd amalgam of software developer and game studio. The company would fund itself by developing artificial artificial intelligence and simulation software for the automobile and defense industries, whilst working on Nox as a side project. Later interviews would refer to key figures in Hyperion's development team as the original trio, made up of course of Booth himself.
Got ourselves a defense contractor.
As well as programmer Colin Day and designer Brian Hansen. Over the next few years, the small group at Hyperion would design, program, and create visual and audio assets for Nox all by themselves, working from Booth's so-called development office, which was in fact a small garage in Colorado. As they toiled away at Nox, other isometric fantasy games hit the market, such as Blizzard's Diablo just after Christmas 1996. But this was of little consequence at the time, since the team remained committed to their goal of delivering a multiplayer-focused Magic Deathmatch title, not an action RPG like Diablo. Towards the latter stages of Nox's development, Booth began demoing the game to potential public.
You know what? I bet that it actually would have done better if they probably would have stuck to that idea. Maybe incorporate some ideas from Diablo, but instead of just... Because no matter how much they tried to make it seem like it was different, the game that came out was very similar to Diablo. And it's just like, you know, back then, trying to copy Diablo was like an MMO now trying to copy WoW. You're not gonna do what WoW does better than WoW, so you might as well set yourself apart by doing something different. Because, I mean, how many games have come out claiming that they were gonna, like, dethrone WoW or whatever and fucking just crashed and burned? How many WoW killers have we had, you know?
Publishing partners who could help support Nox's final push to release. It was in 1997 at the Computer Game Developers Conference in California that Booth would meet Nox's future creative director and lead producer. Booth was attending as part of the Independent Game Developer Program, which gave smaller developers or one-man projects the chance to try and catch the attention of larger studios. Some industry professionals had the opportunity to play Hyperion's title, which was being demoed on a laptop with split-screen local multiplayer, and based on newsgroup posts, the few that did play it came away with positive impressions. Although at the time using crude placeholder graphics the team had cobbled together themselves, as well as lacking sound effects or any story to speak of, Nox nevertheless already demonstrated the viability of the action-packed Magic multiplayer madness Booth had dreamed of years earlier. One of those particularly impressed with Nox was John Haidt, an executive producer at Westwood Studios, which at the time was the crown jewel, or according to one gaming magazine, the only studio of note, owned by troubled publisher Virgin Interactive. Haidt later described his first impression of Booth as someone who was simultaneously confident in their products and yet also clearly panicked by the fact their game had not garnered the interest they'd hoped it would. Haidt spent several hours dueling with Booth and finally expressed interest in signing the title with Westwood and Virgin, who would assist in completing Nox's development and publishing it. Booth claims that he was initially intimidated by the producer's unusually friendly attitude, suspecting that Haidt was merely a corporate shark attempting to steal the game from under him, but eventually came to realize Haidt's enthusiasm was entirely genuine. An informal agreement was made and Haidt presented the game to Westwood's senior management, including founders Brett Sperry and Lewis Castle. Yet it was at this point that the first of many divergences from Booth's original vision for Nox occurred. In one interview, Haidt states that it didn't take much to convince Westwood's management to sign the game, as the gameplay spoke for itself, but adds that it was decided to build a single-player game around Nox, and that this move, combined with bringing the game's production values up to the level of a commercial release, would require, in his words, only a year and a half of further development. This may have conflicted with Booth's original expectations for Nox. In a 2014 Reddit post, former Westwood designer...
What's up with that? In the games industry, it seems like anytime you're hearing a story about a game being developed, they always underestimate by a lot how long the game's going to take to make. It seems like it's every single one. Like, oh yeah, we'll have it done in a year, and it's like 5 years later. Maybe next year.
designer Joseph Hewitt stated that he had heard third hand that when approached by Haidt, Booth had believed Nox was already relatively close to completion, but that Westwood had disagreed and wanted to put significantly more work into the project. If anyone had cause to be skeptical of the original pitch, it was Brett Sperry, who in May of that year was announced to be the new president of worldwide publishing for Virgin, and made no secret of the fact that he believed there were too many games in production, and that cutbacks would have to be made at many of the studios under his aegis. Yet the studio offered their support to Hyperion all the same, and regardless of the specific details, in June 1997, Booth was persuaded to sign Nox up with Westwood. Thus began the task of refashioning Nox into a dual single and multiplayer title worthy of the Westwood branding. It was an unusual situation in the late 90s, as journalists later pointed out, when it was far more common for titles to begin as single-player experiences and later be appended with multiplayer functionality, not the other way round. Yet this did not quite mark Nox's transition from a Hyperion game to a West.
Come get the voodoo. You be careful, man. Be seeing ya. Stay away from Yellow Man. Later. Talkie. Blood and thunder. Taboo. Strength.
Westwood 1. For at least the next year, Nox was still described as being developed by Hyperion, with Westwood or Virgin Interactive as merely the publisher. According to John Haidt, the situation was more complicated, with development initially split between a team of programmers and engineers led by Booth back at Hyperion, and a second team of SFX staff headed by Haidt over at Westwood. On top of this, both official and unofficial sources credit Heuristic Park, headed by wizardry designer D.W. Bradley, as being responsible for Nox's creature designs. Bradley and Westwood were at this time collaborating on Bradley's own passion project, Swords and Sorcery, though how and why Heuristic Park became involved with Nox is unclear. Haidt has stated that alongside internal Westwood staff, an external art team were commissioned, which may refer to Bradley's company. And besides new production values and the addition of a single player mode, other small changes were being made to Booth's original vision. Nox was formally announced to the gaming press in early 1998, presented, as per earlier iterations, as a real-time isometric wizard battling game of strategic spell combos, complemented by a line of sight mechanic and dynamic destructible environments. But certain key elements of Booth's design had already been revised. Most notably, rather than the gamepad-driven Mortal Kombat combos used for casting spells in earlier builds, Haidt had convinced Booth to utilize a hotkey-driven system. Still, Nox remained first and foremost a game of wizardry, and built around 3 color-coded schools of magic. Red for aggressive, combat-centric magic, green for nature and summoning, and blue for trickery and illusions. According to one preview in Computer Games Strategy Plus, Nox at this stage of development featured no conventional weapons at all, focused exclusively on the spellcasting mechanics and possibly staves or wands, though another preview suggests crude hand-to-hand weapons might be added as a last resort. Some details of the game's single-player campaign were also beginning to emerge, with most articles stating that the world of Nox was controlled by wizards and occult figures, and that the greatest of these, the White Wizard ruling over them all, had decreed that the rest of wizarddom must battle to the death to determine his successor. The campaign was to be divided into 3 castles, red, green, and blue, of 3 floors apiece, with the top floor of each castle being a boss fight with the master wizard of that school. One preview states that the final boss would be the White Wizard himself, though 2 others indicate the existence of a 4th, darker school of magic that Westwood were keeping close to their chests. There are some discrepancies as to the exact structure of the campaign, with some indicating the player would be limited to the 3 castles, 2 others suggesting they would adventure across 3 different regions, and 1 implying some degree of open-world exploration. Despite the game's origins as a multiplayer title, Virgin, or Westwood, were apparently not yet ready to showcase this side of the game to the public, though insisted it remained a core component of Nox. In an April 1998 Usenet post by Stardoc's Mike Duffy, Nox was supposed to be formally promoted at E3 of that year, but the developers decided against this at the last minute. At the time, most previews cited a projected release date of fall 1998, roughly in line with Westwood's estimates from a year earlier. Thus, though not extensively covered by the gaming press, Nox was nevertheless now on the radar of some journalists and online gaming sites, usually those focused on role-playing games. In some cases, the game's isometric perspective and medieval fantasy styling elicited comparisons to 1994's Ultima 8. Yet already, there were also those who viewed it less as a game of dueling wizards and more of an action RPG, one directly inspired by the hit fantasy slasher developed by Westwood's longtime rival, Blizzard Entertainment. Of all the print magazines that first covered Nox in early 90s,
that while the game was still like a dueling game with, you know, a light single player thrown on top basically just to give you something to do, but the main focus being player versus player, I'm guessing. They started getting, you know, having people say, oh, it looks very similar to Diablo. And in response to that, they made it more like Diablo. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you be like, no, we need to stay where we're at to avoid, you know, that becoming the case, because obviously people are on the lookout for Diablo clones right now.
1998, every single one compared Hyperion's title to Diablo, and online commentators, even those interested in the game, also viewed it as merely a different kind of action RPG that was, ultimately, still like Blizzard's game. Later previews even joked that Westwood had seen Diablo and developed Nox merely to spite their competition. It was a trend in coverage of the game that was, both contemporaneously and in retrospect, a forewarning of things to come. Yet after this brief
so
surge
dumb.
of coverage in spring 1998, Nox temporarily fell out of the spotlight. A major reason for this was likely turmoil at Westwood's parent company. After years of Virgin Interactive bleeding money, their own corporate masters, Spelling Entertainment Group, had been trying to divest themselves of the troubled publisher. Deliverance came in the form of Electronic Arts, and after some meticulous and convoluted maneuverings that ran the risk of violating anti-monopoly laws in the UK, EA purchased Virgin, and most importantly, Westwood Studios. Publicly, there was significant confusion in the gaming press as to where this left Hyperion's Nox and Heuristic Park's Swords and Sorcery, with speculation on the part of several sites as to whether the two titles had been cancelled entirely. There were also inconsistent reports as to who actually owned Nox when Virgin was sold to EA. Although after signing the publishing deal in 1997, Nox was apparently still owned by Hyperion, in a later interview John Haidt states that Westwood purchased Nox outright in August 1998, and moved key members of the Hyperion team to California to merge with Westwood Pacific. In a much later GameSpot preview, it's suggested that John Haidt and Brett Sperry decided to purchase Nox because they realised, quote, they could very well have a true Diablo killer on their hands, unquote, though it's not clear whether the author was actually paraphrasing Westwood or not. In another interview between GameRush and Hyperion's Brian Hansen, it's stated that Virgin themselves purchased the rights to Nox, and that Booth had suddenly announced, we're moving to California. Want to come along? And in another statement to CGO, Westwood's public relations head stated that Nox had, quote, only been under Westwood's umbrella for a month before the EA thing happened. Thus, either prior to or immediately following the sale of Virgin Interactive, Nox in its entirety, including Booth and his team, became the property of Westwood Studios, and by extension, of Electronic Arts. Although Nox remained listed in product catalogues after the purchase, official clarification as to its fate was given several months later,
Oh,
and Westwood
Age of Mages,
reiterated
hell
that
yeah.
the game remained part of their upcoming lineup, technically still scheduled for a full 1998 release. Press coverage of Nox began to pick up again towards the end of the year, with PC Gamer's December issue featuring a full-page preview. Apparently misidentifying Nox as a Virgin game that had later been acquired by Westwood, an error repeated in some other previews, the article indicated that Nox was by this point very much an internal Westwood project. Promotional shots suggest Nox was in the early stages of a visual overhaul. As though many of the sprites were carried over from the earliest builds, there appeared to be much more extensive use of advanced lighting effects. Still, mechanically, Nox was described in similar terms as previews from spring of that year, focusing on wizard battles, hotkey-driven spell combos, and the color-coded school of magic. Yet once again, it was repeatedly compared to Diablo, characterized, for example, as either a thinking man's Diablo or a strategic, action-filled dungeon romp in the Diablo mold. Moreover,
Okay, well, see, that's not as bad as literally just being like, well, they keep saying it, so we might as well just fucking make it Diablo now. Like, because with that stuff, when they say stuff like that, they're just saying, all they're basically saying, it's isometric, it's 2D, and it's real time. That's like literally the whole, that's where the comparisons begin and end. And the game they keep describing sounds so much more interesting than what it became, and it looks like it looks fun. Like I'm sure I'll eventually get around to playing it, but I would be a whole lot more eager to try it if it was this original idea rather than just, you know, Isekai Diablo.
the preview ended on a slightly ominous note, noting, time will tell if it has the power to compete against the upcoming Diablo 2. Although the sequel to
It wouldn't
Diablo
have
had
to
been
if it was
announced
different
all the way
enough.
back in 1997, the press did not have much to report on until 1998, with more details and footage emerging over the course of the year, and a projected release date looming ever closer. Thus, in early 98, Nox had at worst merely been living in Diablo's shadow. Yet by the end of that year, it was becoming increasingly likely that it would be going toe-to-toe with one of the biggest names in PC gaming. Westwood's belief, according to previews, was that Nox would still be able to stand out from Diablo due to its focus on spell-slinging, technological innovations, and strong multiplayer grounding. But in mid-1999, the Nox that was presented to the public was very different to the one shown the previous year. At first, there was little sign of the game having undergone any sort of major overhaul. Westwood's Nox was formally announced, or rather re-announced, in a press release sent out January 18th. Categorized as an action role-playing game, it was described in terms similar to those of the previous year. A technologically innovative, fast-paced but strategic contest of traps, trickery, and devious spellcraft, and retained the red, green, blue
Hell
division
yeah,
of
there we go.
magicry. The game was to feature a, quote, epic story in which the player travelled through the three lands of Nox, but no further details were given. Yet at some point, either concurrent with or subsequent to this press release, Nox underwent substantial revisions to both its gameplay and its story. Early indications of this came in the form of previews from March and April, likely written at least a month prior to publication. Mechanically, the game was still described in similar terms as before, referencing the color-coded magic system, the multi-floor castle campaign progression, and the story of the White Wizard's succession crisis. An online preview by Games Mania did reveal another set of innovations: randomly generated maps that would be different for each playthrough, and a random quest generator, reminiscent of the basic system used in Diablo and another upcoming rival, Delphine's Darkstone, although the article was otherwise in line with older previews. What was noticeably different were preview screens suggesting a new art direction for Nox, showing what appeared to be several varieties of male and female character models, and more importantly, an increased emphasis on conventional weapons like swords, axes, and bows. Though these were described as merely secondary options.
Yeah, so, like I said, normally the whole lack of there being two different avatars, like one female, one male, normally that's not a big deal, but you definitely should make sure before you let out any sort of pre-release marketing material that implies there is that choice, and then launch without it, because then it's like, you know, people feel lied to. Kind of like when they had, prior to Warcraft coming out, they were sending out promotional screenshots and stuff that showed like towers with special units that you could place in the towers, and gates that were being bashed open with siege engines and all that stuff. And obviously the game launched without it. And so people noticed, which obviously Warcraft was groundbreaking enough on its own just to kind of blow past that shit. But, you know, people still noticed, is the point. It was still a thing, like, where's the walls and the gates and the siege engines? Well, I think you could build walls, but you couldn't have gates and towers and siege engines and stuff.
With magic still the focus, it was an early sign.
Damn, Jai really didn't get anything this level. Smite. Renew. I'll buy those just to have renew, I guess. Buy mana burn.
Later.
That kind of sucks. It's always a letdown when you don't got any, like, you don't get any new ability, really. The fuck? Got a flagged ally in here, no one's doing shit. There we go. Well, that's the guards. Look at this, dude. Look at these fucking cowards. Get in here, let's get him back up. Nero, stop it. Hey! Cut it out. Go sit down somewhere. Come on, big boy, get up. Get up, get up, get up. What are you doing? Oh, man. Damn it. That dog. They're an RN. What's RN? So I feel like I was wanting to get 38 for some reason. I feel like there was something I was looking forward to. What it was. I think there's any item I can use now that I couldn't use before. You got anything in here? Dude. Stop. He's a squirrel out there and he loses his mind.
Go with honor.
Maybe I was just hoping for a new rank of my spells. Alright, guys. Oh, I gotta log for a little while. I want to get back on. I want to get 40 today because I want to make that staff. First, I want to see. No, I'm gonna take a little break. I'll probably be back later. Peace. Appreciate anybody stopping.